Right, welcome to part two. Just a recap of the story so far. So we've been talking about the need for more complex database design that requires to have related tables. We've looked at the reasons for that, and just a reminder around the key example that we're using today, which was relating an owner table with a car table, and how we establish in which direction the primary key needs to move in to actually create that relationship so that it works logically. Okay, and that's where those three different types of relationships come in. The most common one, of course, being a one-to-many relationship. And in this instance, we decided the relationship between car and owner was one owner could own multiple cars, but one car could only be registered to one owner. Therefore, we created a foreign key by moving a copy of the owner ID into the car table. Okay, and it became a foreign key within that table, so that we could now have that link between those two tables. Okay, you then had a look at some isolated, very small scale examples. Some of them are a little bit fictional, but just to get you in your head around using this language about identifying, well, if I'm going to create a relationship between a pet table and an owner table, how do I identify what the foreign key needs to be? Okay, and we ran through the answers to that as well. Okay, context is obviously important as well with some of these, so don't worry if you've gone too far wrong. But basically, that is the foundation of database design. Now, what you're looking at here is a probably quite hideously complex database design. Okay, but what you're looking at is a number of different tables, so a lot of different tables in this particular database design, and it is just a series of those relationships that will be linking the data across these different tables. Okay, so the initial idea that we've looked at can certainly be expanded to create more complex database structures. Anyway, let's get back onto the practical element for today. So you've now got access to a new cars database, and in the new cars database, what I've done is I've added an owners table. Okay, so make sure you download the new copy of the database, and you can see we have a set of owners on this side with a primary key of owner ID. This is the same cars database that you're working on the other day. Okay, the only difference is that you'll notice now I've added to this table the foreign key owner ID. Okay, and I'll just show you something quickly in Access as well, because you're going to need to be able to code this eventually using SQL, but I'm not going to get you to do this bit today. I've gone to Database Tools, and then I've clicked on Relationships to be able to get this view here. And you can actually see now I've created the relationship in Access between these two tables. If I click on this line, you can see the owner ID in the owner table is linked. I've linked to owner ID in the car table, and you can see down here Access has actually picked up that this is a one-to-many relationship too. Okay, so just to show you that you're not actually going to need to code that for this initial work, but later there is an extension task which will require you to see if you can add a new table to this database and also create that link, that relationship between the foreign key and the primary key. Okay, depending on which way we decide that needs to be achieved. Okay, so let's have a look at making a more powerful query now then. And this is it. So I'm going to give you a sequence of queries to make and write in SQL, but they're more complex than the ones that you were doing previously, because you're going to need to use and combine data from two tables. So this first one, the challenge is to find the details of all vehicles owned by an owner. Okay, so what you need to be able to do is specify an owner ID or an owner name. I don't mind particularly with this one. And in yellow, what we've got highlighted is the information that I want you to return and select from the database. Okay, so in this instance, I want to have all of the car details. So I want to have all of these details here returned, all the information about a car returned. And I also want to have the forename and the surname of the actual owner returned along with that. Okay, so let's have a look at what this query might look like and how this works. So line 1, obviously it's a query, so we're going to be using the command word select, and in this case, and just notice the syntax here, I can actually reference, rather than a specific column like I have been doing previously, like make, model, etc., and listing them all, to save myself some time there, I can actually reference the table name, okay, which in this case is cars, and then I've got the full stop and then the asterisk to reference all fields basically. Okay, so they're the two little bits of syntax that you need to include along with the table name if you want to display all the data, all the fields from a particular table. And then you'll notice I've got the comma then to separate, and then I also want to include some information from the owner table too. Okay, but I don't want to return all of the details in this table. I just want the forename and the surname. And just notice I'm referencing there the name of the table and then the full stop and then the specific field name. Okay, and I've done that twice. Okay, so that's just good practice to get into, particularly from an exams point of view, even though it seems a little bit arduous. Okay, so there, so that's how I've done that. So I've referenced it. I want all the fields from here, and I just want the forename and the surname from this table in the data that I retrieve from the database. Okay, next line stays the same. Notice the addition here is I now need to retrieve data from more than one table, so I'm now naming both of those tables on the from, separated by the comma. So there, obviously, if I'm going to get that data, I need to utilize both tables. If I was just getting the data from the cars table, then obviously I wouldn't need to include owner here. So you know, do be aware of that. And then the key thing here are my conditions. Okay, so you know, I think I said actually I'm going to change this from owner ID and search by forename. Okay, so here I've specified my first condition in my where, which is that the owner.forename field must be equal to Emily. Okay, so I'm targeting Emily and I want to find out what cars she owns specifically. And then this is the key bit, and the key bit here is to make sure that the database is aware of that relationship. Okay, so you can see I've added an AND clause, and what I'm saying here is that the owner ID is equivalent to the car's owner ID. Okay, so if I'm running through this query, I'm going to find the owner forename must be Emily, okay, which I've got here. Okay, and the owner.owner ID, well, there's only one Emily in this database, and that ID is ID number 2. ID number 2. So that ID number 2 must match up with every instance of ID number 2 in the car table. Okay, owner ID in the owner table matching with owner ID in the car table. That's enforcing that relationship. So this query can now scan through this database and pick out all of the car details relevant and the forename and the surname from this table for this particular query, and this is what the result looks like. Okay, so you can see I have a bit of duplication here on Emily because Emily owns all of these vehicles in the database currently, but hopefully you understand that idea. Okay, but I need to confirm in my SQL there is a link between the owner ID of these two tables. Okay, the primary key of this table, the foreign key of that table. Right, just one other thing to point out. You'll notice in this database here, and this is going to be the same for you guys, is that you're going to need to populate this table and give these cars some owners. Okay, and you're going to need to make sure that the numbers that you input here exist and reference the numbers in the owner table. Okay, but that's entirely up to you. You decide how many vehicles Alice owns and Emily owns, etc. Okay, but if you don't actually specify an ID there, you'll just get no results come up when you try this particular query because there'll be nothing to match these IDs up. Okay, and you might want to try it with a different forename as well, or a different owner ID number would probably be better for this query because that's going to be unique actually. Okay, so these are some queries for you to have a go at making using SQL. And again, if you can produce these queries, check that they work, and then copy them into a Word document. Okay, you can see what I want you to search by. You'll need to specify specific details within here, so like a specific surname to use, for instance, a specific car ID in the where clause, and then these are the details that I want you to return. Okay, and you can basically test to see if that relationship is working correctly and whether you're able to write these slightly more complex SQL queries. Just note that not all of these queries will require you to get data from both tables. Okay, so you're going to need to think about that in terms of the appropriate SQL to use and how many tables you're going to need to use, etc., as you run through. Okay.